Can you hear me
Okay.
okay?
Yes, I can hear you presently.
Yeah, I can hear you. I've started recording as well, just so that you know.
Okay.
Okay, well, lovely to meet you.
Yeah.
After all this time, I mean, I've been a huge Immaterial fan. I first heard of you, well, back in 1986 when you had your hit, your first big hit,
Mhm.
Driving Away from Home. And then it was about, I remember Ed's Funky Diner as well, and then it was about 3 or 4 years later. I went to I came from Dumbarton, along the west coast of Scotland, and I used to go to the library to borrow books, but they also did music, and that's where I then found the second album, Song, on cassette. And that was how I got introduced to that a few years later. So I borrowed that. But just to start the interview, formally, for people who don't know you, if you can just introduce yourself first of all, please, for me. Thank you.
Okay. Well, I'm John Campbell, and I'm one half of the duo that call itself It's Immaterial.
Hello, John.
Hello.
Now, most people remember you from 1986 when you had a big hit, a top 20 hit in the charts with Driving Away from Home,
Yeah.
Jim's tune. But going right back to the very beginnings for you, I mean, you came from Liverpool originally.
No, I didn't. I came
Oh, okay.
from north east Manchester, I suppose. It came from the Pennine area.
Okay.
So I was used to, rolling hills and valleys and small villages.
Hmm.
And then I went to art school in Liverpool. I think I actually went in 1975. I think I
Okay.
started the art school in September 76.
And what was the attraction for art school? Was that always something that you'd set out to do?
I think it was, yes.
Yeah.
I think in my early teens, I felt a bit kind of lost as to how I was going to support myself for the rest of my life. And I tried a few summer jobs, and when I did eventually leave from the sixth form, I went to a few interviews. I remember one place especially where I actually got the job, called Wilson's International Advertising,
Hmm.
which was just down a little back street in Manchester. It wasn't that international really, but I stayed there probably about a week or so, and even that, being involved in graphic arts, still seemed a little stifling for me. So I retreated to the foundation course in art in Rochdale, because it's just something I'd always been fascinated by and I'd always drawn and tried writing things. It's
Hmm.
a pastime I really enjoyed.
And was there a particular, part of art school, I mean, were you a painter, a printer, or what was was there a particular subject you were interested in?
Well, I went originally with the idea of becoming an artist, a painter, and maybe.
Okay.
But once I got there, there was a number of us in that year who were also very interested in performing, really, and so I got kind of distracted. I was interested in music, but it wasn't. It was never main. It was never my main thrust. I did genuinely want to become a painter or an illustrator, something like that. But of course, I got. There was a group of us with Henry Priestman, Martin Dempsey, a couple of characters I can remember straight away, and we were all also interested in music, and that notion of the art school band started to get in the way of things a bit. The great thing about Liverpool Art School back then, there were three buildings.
Hmm.
There was the Hope Street building, which which is known now on the tourist industry as well, because that's where John Lennon went to art school. And next door to the Hope Street building was the Liverpool Institute, where Paul McCartney went to school.
Okay.
But the art school had two other buildings as well. One on Myrtle Street, which had a sculpture department, and it had like Nissen huts or something in the yard where you could go and kind of hide away and do your own thing. But there was also a third building that was maybe 20 minutes walk away, and it was actually an old deaf school that the art school had taken over. So most of those people who were interested in being in groups and music and all that, we used to go up to the deaf school and hang out there and try, try out playing together and the like. So that's what really happened. I kind of swerved becoming the famous artist I thought I would be. We kind of got lost in music, really.
Uh-huh. And is this how your first band, Yachts, came about then?
That's right. Well, at art school, there was always kind of the art school dance. I remembered that at the end of every term, there was always a dance, and the band a little bit older than us, a year or two at the most older than us at the art school, were deaf school, who were named after that particular building. And they just, I think, won the Melody Maker competition for up and coming bands or something. So they were signing to Warner Brothers and were getting a reputation nationally. So there was kind of a vacancy for somebody to play the art school dance, And Henry and I and Martin Watson and Bob Bellis all formed a band originally called Albert Dock. And we used to play in art school, and we played around Liverpool quite a bit. And in that way, we got ourselves a little local reputation, and we came. We were noticed by Roger Eagle and Peter Fulwell, who ran what became a punk club. It was just a music club here called Eric's, and we ended up having like a Thursday night residency at the club at a very exciting time. Really, that started probably in 1976. We did that, and it was Roger Eagle who kind of pulled us all on one side one day and said, "You seem to be getting some kind of attention, and you should take this seriously. But there are too many of you in the group," because there was about, I don't know, it must have been got up to, because at one time it was called, rather foolishly, Albert Dock, which is now a tourist attraction in Liverpool, but at the time was very run down and dilapidated. It was called Albert Dock and the Cod Warriors, the original. And it could be anything up to, 15 people or something. So Roger Eagle told us to strip it down, hone it down to something that we could move around the country with, and so we did, and we asked politely all our friends to leave, and we changed the name to Yachts, and I think Henry and I had, I know that I lived with Henry in a flat at the time, and we were kind of the songwriters for Yachts when it started, and we had our influences really were kind of that American kind of surf punk thing. And only really were they our influences because I remember there was a record shop called Bradley's, and you could go in there and you could buy an imported album for 10 pence. So we'd spend £1 each in there and buy 10 albums. And these albums were bands from like the Sunrays, which were kind of, like an attempt to be the Beach Boys, and there's a band called the Paupers who were from Canada, and it was basically the way they looked and their graphics that made us buy the things. And more often than not, we didn't like the music that was on them, but things like Question Mark and the Mysterians and the Kingsman Louie, all these kind of things were, where they used organs, because Henry had a little Farfisa organ, so the sound was kind of built around that, really. So we looked at all those kind of trashy, punky, organ-based American bands, really.
And Yachts became quite successful in their own right, because I hope I'm right about this, but I think I read that Yachts had toured with The Who, and you'd supported Elvis Costello. Was that correct?
Yeah. By the time Yachts would toured with The Who, I'd left by then.
Okay.
But I remember supporting Elvis Costello on a number of times at especially at the Nashville Rooms in Islington, which was a kind of very well-known London venue for those kind of what they call kind of new wave and punk acts at the time. So
Hmm.
we supported Elvis quite a few times because, of course, we've been signed to the same record label. We were
Ah,
we were both on Stiff Records. So it was there was a roadie who worked for Stiff. I'm trying to remember his name now. I can't actually bring his name back, but he was a likable chap, and he kind of coined the phrase "power pop" for us, and got the company to print up badges and all kinds of stuff. But I think that's one of the original. I think that's. I think I'm not right to think that the phrase "power pop" originated there with him at
mhm.
Stiff Records, and that's how they tried to kind of promote us, because in those early days we did that thing of kind of dressing a bit surfy rather than in a punk way.
Okay. And so you mentioned a moment ago that you had left Yacht. So what did you do next? Was it straight into forming It's Immaterial, or was there something in between?
There was a little bit in between, and that was when Yacht started to take off. I was in my second year at, in the art school, and we were by now we were we were probably playing maybe 4 or 5 nights a week, and on many occasions we had a company called Swing Best in London that were managing us, and they'd book us in to say, I don't know if I just say like Scunthorpe, and then the
Mhm.
next day you might be in Bath, and then the next day you might be somewhere like Penrith or something. So we were kind of driving places, playing, coming back to Liverpool, getting up in the morning, driving north, coming back to Liverpool that night, driving south the following day. So the whole week was just driving all over.
Mhm.
And through that, uh, really, I lost a grip on the art school and the course I was doing. So it was my decision to leave the yachts after a while, because I I felt I didn't want to be stuck in that power pop area, and I wanted to complete my art school course. So I went back to art school for a year,
Ah, okay.
completed the final year, and it's after that. I already knew Jarvis Whitehead. It's after that Jarvis and I started having ideas to put its material together.
Okay. So that presumably, now we're now into the early 80s, approaching, because It's Immaterial's debut, as far as the public, the public at large are aware, was around about 1986 when you became, you had your first big hit. So the first album, Life's Hard and Then You Die, um, in hindsight, to me, I mean, it was always quite an epic sounding album to me,
Mm.
and it sounds very eclectic. There's so much layers and world music influences, I think, there too. So, given how wide in scope it sounds, did it take a long time to record it and to put it all together?
Well, surprisingly enough, it probably took maybe 6 weeks or something like that to do. But
Okay.
amassing the material and arranging it, Jarvis and I had been doing for a couple of years before that,
Mhm.
really, getting the material together. But Jarvis was always interested in other kind of musical cultures, and kind of purloining bits of them and layering them up, as you say, in the work that we did. And I was kind of the same. I think we both didn't want a kind of straightforward rock stroke pop sound. We wanted something else. And I know we didn't want to, although Driving Away from Home has got 4 beats on the floor, we also didn't really want to get stuck in a groove of using that and ending up somehow being part of the dance culture as well. We wanted to have our own little space.
Mhm. And you mentioned all the driving that you guys did when you were touring. Is that, I mean, is that where the origins for the single "Driving Away from Home" came from, Jim's tune, or was that somewhere else?
Well, it's a bit of that, yeah, because
Okay.
we did all that touring, as you say, but it's also the kind of nature of the USA and the names they have. They've got a driving music culture, but they have all these great names, Albuquerque and whatever,
Mm.
that sit really nicely in songs. And we haven't got that. And as I mentioned before, you can't really you couldn't really write a successful tune around Scunthorpe or something. I don't think it kind of went. So it was that notion of trying to write a British driving song, a country almost influenced song for over here.
Okay. And in the, I mean, the album contains a lot of references to, fictional and real people. You've got Viv Nicholson, Tex Avery, Jack Kerouac, of course. I mean, are these, what was the reasoning for, is it simply these were people who interested you, or, they were icons, or what was the reason for, inserting all those characters?
They were people I'd come across. And like, for instance, let's say Tom Mix and Tex Avery were influences coming through from my father. He'd mentioned those, and that was kind of his cowboy culture when he was younger. And Malcolm X was kind of in the news a lot when I was in my early teens, and these things like Sylvester, the animated car, they're just things that come into my kind of field of reference through those kind of formative years, really. And I always used to like to pick them out and put them in songs.
It's funny every time I listen to the album and to that particular single. Always imagine all these characters in the car with you and Jarvis, and it's just this image that I get in my head.
I know, but that's kind of it in the Ed's Funky Diner thing. That was kind of the premise of the song. It's what you could go, and that was what's it called? Ed's Diner. There was an artist called Ed Kineholz who did a sculpture about a diner in Los Angeles, which later on both Jarvis and I went to the actual diner that the song was based on, and it was through Ed Kineholz's sculpture I was thinking, well, what if there was a place you could go and sit down and talk to all these people, that have kind of you've passed, you've heard of on the journey so far.
And so that's where that came from.
Right.
It's I always still get goosebumps when I listen to the Dead Man's Curve version of Driving Away from Home, which I just love. And me and my friend Grant, who's sadly no longer with us, we went to art school up in Aberdeen. We were studying up there, and we didn't get a lot of studying done. It was our first time away from home, and we used to play the Dead Man's Curve version of Driving on a loop, pretty much, and I always used to. There's that sequence where you talk about Jack Hatchback, Jack Cadillac, and we used to love that little in-joke, that Easter egg, that in-joke, and even now when that sequence comes up, I still get goosebumps, and I think it's a mixture of knowing the in-joke, but also because it's a bit like you growing up, I guess, with these characters. It's Immaterial was almost like a character to me growing up, and to Grant. So I've always got very happy memories of it. But when that became a big hit for you guys, it went to number 18, if I remember right.
There's a story behind that as well. We had that was during the period we were in the studio recording Life's Hard and Then You Die, and the record company decided to put a single out as a taster for the forthcoming album. So they did, and that was Driving Away from Home. But we hadn't completed the album yet. We were still working on it. And suddenly it started very quickly getting a lot of radio coverage and climbing the charts. So they took us out of the studio to promote the single. So we were kind of working long days in the studio and then having to go out, to do an interview, then back to the studio because they were now pushing us to finish the album because they'd already had a single out. And then the way it got to 18 in the charts. and they ran out of copies of it. They hadn't
Oh,
pressed enough copies because they didn't suspect it would be that popular. So they ran out of copies, and that's why it stalled in the charts. A
right.
couple of weeks after that, it was getting even more radio plays than it had when it got to 18. But they didn't have a copy of it they could sell.
Ah,
So by the
blind.
time they reprinted them all, it had lost its moment.
Yeah, the momentum. Yeah.
So it was a bit of a, I don't know. So that was the moment on the national charts. Not how I plugged into that.
um, you ended up. I mean, I know. Top of the Pops certainly in the 80s was a big deal, presumably for any band. And I know that you, as it's Immaterial, appeared on Top of the Pops. Was it a big deal for you? Were you bothered about commercial success, or were you simply just producing it, as art, given your background?
I think it was a big deal. I think it is something like
Mm,
that always is, and I'd watched it myself, obviously, when I was young. But for both Jarvis and I, we did really enjoy the making of the music and the making of the videos because we had a big say in the storyboarding of the videos that went on. But we, in a way, we were quite nervous characters. So when you get shy character, I don't know how to express it, but when you become the focus of attention like that, it's it's very difficult, really, and it can be kind of, if I don't deal with it correctly, it was kind of stultifying at times. I
mm,
remember after the Top of the Pops appearance, the record company had hired out a Japanese restaurant, just booked the whole restaurant and invited lots of people down there. And it was in, I can't remember the name of the hotel, but it was the restaurant attached to a hotel. What was the name? I can't remember it anyway. But it was, I couldn't really face going into the restaurant. There's too many people there, too many people focusing on you. So I went into the bar just down there, and I sat down, and I found myself sat at the bar next to two members of the Temptations. I just spent an hour talking to the Temptations while everybody else was in, this Japanese restaurant eating and celebrating. It's too much, that kind of focus for me.
mm.
I don't like that.
Yeah, no, that's fair enough, and especially when that kind of spotlight is suddenly thrust upon you, and you're not really expecting it, I suppose, as well.
Well, I don't think that's the reason I entered the music industry. I
Yeah,
didn't really want to be a pop star in that sense. I just wanted to enjoy myself making music.
hmm yeah, and there's going back to that Dead Man's Curve, which I know I'm a bit obsessed with, but there's a line in there. And it's where you say, everything is going downhill. And when I listened to that again recently, it made me think about, the music industry generally. Do you think it's good these days? Is it better, or is it worse, or are you just indifferent to it? Is it just different these days?
I think it's incredibly different because of the experience we've just had with Pledge and Pledge going under and that kind of thing. So we've had to refinance the completion of this album we're putting
Mm,
together now. So I think it's different. These different platforms, and I think it's broken down now into so many kind of subgenres of things that it's difficult to see what's there for me.
mm,
To kind of rake through all the coals and find a nugget. There's that much online and everywhere. So I think it's changed in that way. But it's that idea that came really from that punk period of the do-it-yourself. Everybody can do it themselves now.
mm.
It's changed massively in that sense. But I'm not sure at times whether that's a good thing or a bad thing because there's no sifting going on anywhere. So
Yeah.
it's flooded. Everything's flooded. So it's harder to find, like I say, the nuggets that you really want.
It's interesting. It's the same. I mean, for people in the audience who are going to see this who don't know, I'm an author, and it's very similar in the book world as well because you go on Amazon to find a book, and there are so many subgenre categories now.
Yeah.
So there, and it almost feels like there's too much choice. There's too much, as you say, sifting through to find that book.
Yeah, I agree, because it's like I don't know if you use the same kind of analogies, but we used to call it it's like the Chinese restaurant syndrome. The menu's massive, so you just, in the end, I just can't look through any more menu, and I don't really eat anything there. I get that kind of feeling about the music industry.
Yeah. And I touched on books a moment ago. Again, there's a line from one of your songs, which is from Happy Talk, from your first album, and you say, "I used to be a novelist, but I've gone right downhill now, haven't I?" And I guess what I was wondering when I listened to that song again recently was, obviously we know that Jack Kerouac was some kind of influence, or was certainly iterated in your first album. But for my followers, there's going to be a lot of people who read books who are going to be listening into this. So, do you have favourite authors? Were you influenced by books or literature at all?
I was really. I was especially influenced by. There was an idea in the 80s of. I don't know if you came across these kind of sudden fiction things, where there were books of stories that were no longer than one paragraph each story, and I kind of like. I like that focus. It reminded me very much of the kind of structures of songs as well. But I started getting very interested in kind of short stories, really.
Okay.
During my earlier years, in my teens, obviously I'd read Jack Kerouac, and I remember John Barth, the Sockweed Factor. I don't know if you come across them. They were kind of books from your teenage years, But as I got a little older, I got fascinated by people like Richard Ford, the American novelist who wrote Independence Day. And I think he had a series of books called The Sports Writer. And Mr. Bascom was the main character, the journalist in there. And he did something very interesting. Mr. Bascom was the journalist in The Sports Writers. I think there's 3 in that series. And then he wrote Independence Day. And I think he won the Pulitzer Prize with Independence Day. But Bascom was still the main character in that book, but he'd left. He wasn't a journalist anymore. He was selling real estate on the east coast of America. And I like those kind of little things, I like one song spilling into another. And I like the little things to come through, So I always found on the tail of music, on the tail of a song, I always found it was a great place to talk and add something to it. So there was almost, instead of coming to an end, you leave people with a thought that might carry on with them. That kind of idea,
That explains some of your lyrics, I think, as well, because now that you're talking about that, there is a lot of that in your lyrics, I think, where you're left with it's almost like an ellipsis at the end of it. Yes, it's like the song doesn't actually end. And that leads nicely into your second album, Song, which to me, it is like a series of short stories, more so than the first album. I feel it's like little travelogues. And it sounds a lot more introspective to me, this album. So I know Callum Malcolm, who also produced The Blue Nile, was the producer for this album, and it does have a much more expansive sound. So was this a deliberate thing, or did this just organically happen? Why the very different sound and introspection this time?
I think it's, as you were saying, it was much more introspective. It's actually just talking about short stories and that kind of, that first album, the material on that was just beginning to develop a way of writing lyrics and an approach, And by the time, we got to doing the material for Song, I was very much interested in kind of looking at it in a cinematic sense. And filmic, so get a landscape that you can tell a story in was more the way we were going there. And so I'd known of Callum Malcolm's work from the Blue Nile and from other acts as well. And I also knew that he worked a lot with classical musicians and recorded orchestras and such. I'd heard some of that work. So I kind of had the idea that maybe Callum would suit this approach in this album. And so we sent him, Jarvis and I sent him demonstrations of the songs we had so far, which weren't finished by any means and were very sketchy. And Callum just said he'd love to do it immediately as soon as he'd heard them, you know, and kind of the idea of what we were trying to do. So that was great. And it was another kind of backstory to that album was Jarvis and I, you know, I was talking about feeling that the music pop star bit of the industry didn't fit us at all. So we were actually thinking we could maybe getting to write stories and music for films and actually genuinely go that way and leave kind of this structure behind. But we did actually get commissioned for a film with, I think, I had a working title called Yag by this Mary Jimenez, a French director who flew over to meet us, and we got the job to write the music for that film. And we worked on it for about 18 months, took up a lot of our time, and she kept kind of flying back and forth to see how it's going with us. And she got really, really enthusiastic about the film, so much so that she flew to America and had talks with a couple of film studios in America. And as soon as the French government, who were backing the film to be made in the French language, as soon as they heard she'd done that, they withdrew all the funding they'd given. So the thing just collapsed completely. And we've got reels of tape that we did for that are kind of rotting in a garage now.
That's such a shame.
It's a good year out of our lives doing that. But there's been lots of cases of that, just like any life along the way. These things happen, don't they?
That's a shame. And would it ever, would you ever be able to release that in a future project, or is there a copyright thing or something because it was a collaboration? Or
well, what we've done is the album that we've been working on for Pledge, which again is was supposed to be the third album. It was supposed to be After Song, and we actually started recording that with Callum Malcolm back in 1993 now, I think. We went to Castle Sound with Callum for about 2 weeks, and we took the demonstrations again, and for this album, House was Sale, and we put the songs down and the shape of them there. And some of those, 2 or 3 of those songs, are based on some of the material that we had for the film, but rearranged and changed a little bit, So.
Right. Okay. And going back to your talking, you've mentioned quite a lot about short storytelling, and I've noticed that in a lot of your work, as well as singing, you focus a lot on the spoken word. What's the attraction to you for the spoken word?
It's that intimacy of it. And you can tell a story, you don't have to be so disciplined. You can go across beats and cross chord change, all that kind of thing. You can just settle in to the landscape of the music and genuinely kind of whisper down someone's ear about something. I like the combination of the singing and the narrative, because it's what we talked about before. It allows you to bleed the edges and things like that. You can go off. You can go off on a tangent for a minute and then come back to the theme. All those kind of things you can do.
Yeah.
And a narrative and sung approach.
It seems quite experimental to me as well, and it seems to tie in with your art background as well, that you can experiment with all these things too. Song was a hugely influential album for me, because when that came out, that was when I was starting to write. I was at art school, and the reason I failed at art school was because I was spending so much time writing what I hoped would be a graphic novel. And that never happened. But eventually, it was inspired by, at the time, by Missing, which was on the song album, and which is one of my favourite songs on the album. And for those of people out there who haven't listened to it, it's a really melancholic piece of work about a young couple, Alistair and Carol, who go missing. And I took that into a kind of crime scene scenario, and eventually, and Alistair and Carol are two characters in my novel, my first novel, A Murder of Crows. As a result of that, the editor told me to change Carol to Caroline because it was supposed to be a young couple in my book. And the editor said, change it to Caroline because that sounds younger than Carol. But between you and me, I'm hoping one day I'll get to do a revised edition of that book and I can make it Carol again.
Right.
But that song was a huge inspiration for me back then. And eventually that story that I started back in 1990 became my first novel, A Murder of Crows, which then got published about 3 years ago. And Life on the Hill, which is another track from the album, was also a big influence on a story that I've written, which is yet to be published as well. Are you aware of the influence you've had on other people? Has anybody ever got in touch with you to say, oh, I listened to this song of yours, or, you know, you were a big influence on me, and have they gone on to do work, you know, that's become noticed in any way, shape or form?
Well, yes, there are a number. Only in the last few years, surprisingly.
Okay.
Maybe the last decade or something, people have started to come out of the woodwork and talk about song a lot more, because we just thought it drifted into the ether and nobody had taken any kind of notice of it. Like I was saying, we had a few kind of connections with people in the film industry, but eventually, for other reasons, really, for personal reasons, all that petered out, really, because we had to deal with some family issues for a few years. But the last 10 years or so, I'd say, people have come out of the woodwork. Like, there's a script writer, screenwriter called Campbell Morgan, who's done a lot of comedy programs and a lot of drama on TV. And it's her favourite album for a start. And there's a number of people like that have come forward. So I don't think it has an enormous fan base, but it has a very committed fan base of people who have gone on to do things. You know, so it's quite nice to see it like that as well. You know, it seems to have meant a lot to the people who did listen to it.
Yeah.
I think.
And you also mentioned you've obviously kind of you've worked on film before, but it was moving forward from song and going into the 21st century. I guess you were a track that you'd written was used for The Manchurian Candidate in 2004, which starred Meryl Streep and Denzel Washington. So how did that come about?
It just came about of a phone call. It was a very old track. It was probably the first thing Jarvis and I wrote together, and it so it came out. That came out. Oh, it might have been the very late 1970s or something. But it just turned out a phone call came from this film company in America, and it was Jonathan Dean was a massive fan of the group, apparently, and he wanted a track from the group in one of his films, which was fantastic for us. And then I had to go around and find out who actually owned that track, because we'd been through so many recording contracts with small labels and with Warner Brothers and with Virgin. We didn't know whether the track had been sold on to these companies as we went along from one to the other. But eventually I found that the original recording that I'd made hadn't been sold on, but the next one, because it was recorded about 3 times, I think, that song, the next one and the one after that, WEA owned. So, but luckily enough, Jonathan Dane wanted to use the original one that we'd done on our own here in Liverpool. So that's how that got in there. But it came out of the blue, just a phone call one afternoon. And with a deadline saying, you know, can you, by tomorrow evening, can you give me the go ahead, and we'll send you the contract by fax then, and you can sign it and send it back as soon as possible. You know, we have to know now. So, I did all the searching I could, and eventually I found that, we did own the rights to that and just about got it in time.
Mhm. And aside from that, I mean, there was a huge gap between album number 2 and now your new album.
Yeah.
So the new album, House for Sale, so that's had a long, winding road. So can you introduce for the audience this new album?
Well, I mean, touched on it before. It's the third album we'll have made,
Yeah.
and it really should have been out in the mid-90s or something. But so it's what we wanted to do. We have a little recording studio in Liverpool here, and Jarvis and I have always seen each other one day a week to work together on material, and we've written things for radio plays and songs here and there and such forth. Always on a Thursday, but how it ended up there. But it's been a Thursday for years. But we had this material that we'd done with Callum Malcolm in Castle Sound, and as I mentioned, really kind of life got in. We came back from Castle Sound, and life got in the way for a year or so, and so this little box of DAT tapes that was almost put on the shelf in the studio while we got on with other work, and then life started to drift into me going back full cycle and teaching at the art school now.
Ah, okay.
So I went back to teach at the art school, and then after that, with my partner Moira Kenny, we put together a kind of arts organisation called the Sound Agents,
Mm-hmm.
and we record oral histories and the likes of stuff, and do public artworks and public installations and that kind of thing. So I've never been really far away from that storytelling thing in one way or another. But we were clearing out the studio one day to change to another location, and I came across the box of tapes that were on there. And I know somebody in the Liverpool studio called Elevator, the chap who owns that is an old musician friend of mine. And he had, luckily enough, 4 of these machines that play these 8-track DAT tapes. So, because I think we'd done 32-track recordings of each track, just ideas stacked on
Mm-hmm.
each other. So we went there and played them on this and transferred them to Pro Tools Medium. And we thought, well, it's kind of an interesting project to do this now. But that was about 6 years ago that we swapped them to the Pro Tools Medium, and since then, because there'd been a lot of deterioration on the tapes, so we've been patching up, and in places where we say we didn't have a chorus, we've been writing a chorus for, and then we've been trying to write a new rhythm for this and all that eventually. So it has had a very long gestation period, but it's only been kind of intense periods of work over all those years. Now and then you dip in for a few days, then you leave it for a week or two, But it's finally there and in shape now, which is good. And
Mm-hmm.
so it kind
And
of does belong. It's the third. It's a material album from that time. Really, we wanted to do though. We've written so many songs since then that we also want to make available in the future. But we wanted to get that album finally out, and with the original 10 songs completed that we
mm,
did with Callum all those years ago.
it's brilliant. I'm really excited to hear it. I know I've had a little preview, having been one of the pledgers. But I'm really looking forward to it. But the approach for this album, I mean, this album was crowdfunded into existence. So why did you choose that route for your third album?
Really, I really don't know. I don't know. I was just, I think it comes back to a conversation with Moira, my partner, who said we were just saying, well, unless you do something, you'll never get it done. So really, we just looked at all the platforms that were available out there, and a way of kind of that we could probably find our fan base on, So we thought out of all those kind of funding platforms, that Pledge seemed to be the most stable and the most well established. So that's really the only reason why we chose to go that route, because we thought that would be the easiest way to contact people. And unfortunately, it turned out to be a bit of a disaster. And sorry, I'm going to honour the pledges. That's why I had to refinance the album, because all that money to manufacture and master and package and distribute the album when it's out all went down with pledge, so we didn't have any funds to
Yeah.
complete at all. So I don't know.
It's the wonders of modern technology, and then it all implodes. It's
Yeah,
it's interesting because that was how I brought my first novel, A Murder of Crows, into being. It was crowdfunding through Unbound,
yeah.
and it made me think about. There's quite a lot of songwriters who have gone to Unbound to do autobiographies. Would you ever consider that one day?
I might do, yeah. There's also a thing now that the PRS organization, they fund musicians as well now. Like the Arts Council fund people and that.
Ah, okay.
They're looking into that kind of thing. So do PRS now, which is the Performing Rights Organization.
Mhm.
You can say, I need 6 months to write or something, and depending what you're doing, they'll fund you for those 6 months. So there's a couple of things I've been looking into a lot down that road, but at the moment, I'm desperately kind of, a one-man machine trying to finish off this album. We've got the masters done for it now, thanks to everybody's support, and the artwork's completed now. So we are now looking to manufacture as soon as possible.
Brilliant. And how does this compare in sound and tone to previous Immaterial works, would you say?
We've gone a long way down the road now with our songwriting. We're quite kind of, there's a distance between the approach we have now and the approach we had then. But this one's quite interesting listening to it, because it's an attempt, I think. It was done just after song, and I think I think the thought process must have been, oh, we've gone too far with song. We've made something incredibly uncommercial. If we're going to survive, as musicians and live off funds we make that way, we're going to have to rein it back a bit. So the feel of these 10 songs on House of Saturn seems somewhere between Life's Hard and Then You Die and Song. It's a middle ground somewhere in there that these are. I think we did attempt to rein back from the song feel, but there's more tempo in this album than there is in song. So
Mm-hmm.
it's around the same area.
Okay. And it may well be far too early to even ask this question, but is there an inkling of a fourth album in the works?
Well, there's lots and lots of material. There really is lots of material that we could put into a fourth album. As I say, for every Thursday, we used to get down into we've got a 16-track TAC tape machine, and we'd go down there like a couple of old boffins, in warehouse coats, and work with this 16-track machine. And so over the years, we've made many demonstrations of songs in all kind of different genres there, but within its material kind of feel. So the material is there, and we just have to get this House for Sale out, and then look at maybe, putting in. We could easily gather another 10 and put that out. Yeah, why not?
Mm-hmm. Okay. And this is probably my last question, I guess. So, do you have an idea when and where House for Sale will be available once it is completed?
Well, as I say, at the moment, I'm just looking to go to manufacture on it, and I'm talking to a chap called Tim Bonus, who is I think he was the originator of the site Burning Shed. Do you know that? Have you ever used
I
Burning
thought I'd heard of Tim Bonus, funnily enough.
Tim
Yeah.
Bonus? Yeah, that's
Yeah.
it. And, well, it turned out he has been contacting me for years, and just asking that question: is there any more material coming? And after pledge kind of collapsed, he contacted me again because he's a big fan of the material that Joseph and I have made previously.
Mhm.
And he suggested that they could build a shop for us there. So at the moment, I'm thinking it looks like it's going to be available through Burning Shed, because if you have supporters within that company, you know, it can only be good, can't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, well, thank you very much for taking part and giving me some of your time. It's been lovely to chat with you, and I'm sure everybody will be waiting with bated breath on the new album and looking forward to it.
That's great. Thanks, Ian. It's been good to talk to you as well.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you. I'll stop recording just this.